I was giving David Plazas the holy hell about his article yesterday, and I thought, well, why not have David on? He can defend himself right here in studio. And as usual, you know what? Whether we disagree or agree, I applaud David for being willing to step in and have conversations about these very important issues. You are the editorial editor of the Tennessean, and David joins us in studio. Hey, David.
Hey, thank you so much, Matt. And I love Back to the Future references. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Fly. Old school, lost on younger listeners and younger viewers, but that's all well and good. So I mean, things have to have changed for you guys at the Tennessean in terms of just the sheer amounts. We were talking right before we came on air. Just the amount of activity is really unseen in modern American political history. The amount that is getting done, for some, it's, people are excited about it because they're 100% behind it. Some hate it and they just can't stand it. But you cannot deny the amount of activity that's going on.
Oh, it's tons of activity. We've been busy every single day and getting reader input every single day about a variety of issues. And a lot of the work I do is mostly local and state, but obviously President Trump has an influence on the conversation all around. And so we constantly get letters from those who are upset about Project 2020 filtering in perhaps into the Trump administration, and others who are elated with DOGE coming on to uncover, why is the federal government so bloated?
Right. So before we get into the federal stuff, I'm curious, obviously the governor, Bill Lee, just signed the Education Freedom Act, as they called it, into law, 20,000 scholarships. What was were you surprised at the amount of conservative opposition to the legislation?
No, I wasn't. I have a relationship with McMinnville, Tennessee. I've been going there for the last 6 or 7 years, 7 times. I've talked to a lot of rural legislators and even talked to people like Representative Jody Barrett from Dixon and others from across the state. And a lot of it is about protecting their own public schools because they see the difference between Nashville or Memphis and their own communities. So I was not surprised with this vote outcome. I think that the governor wouldn't have called a special session if he didn't think he could win. And the fact that he had the full-hearted support of the speakers and the leaders, that was a huge deal. So it didn't surprise me at all. And the people who were consistent in saying no, for the most part, I think it was something to be expected.
Well, and frankly, from a political standpoint, a very interesting tactical move. Some in my audience didn't like it. Others applauded it. I kind of think it really depends on which side you're on the issue. The tactical move of doing the special prior to getting into the General Assembly where things can get lost in the weeds.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is the governor was humiliated last year when his bill didn't even get a vote. And so for him to go through that again and go into defeat, he wasn't going to have that. I mean, at the end of the day, he's a politician who wants to win. And he found this. And some of the criticism, I think maybe from your listeners as well, is about why would you tie Hurricane Helene aid to education aid? That was the big criticism, I think, that I heard at least, because people said those should be different things, but they were coupled, and the governor had an incredibly successful special session with that and the immigration bill.
Well, and I asked him, the governor was on our show, he was in our studio, and I asked him directly, how he responded to the criticism about the quote unquote, they were calling them bribes, the $2,000 bonuses to teachers, that were being described as bribing teachers to support the legislation. He saw it completely different, as you might expect. He said he saw it as rewarding teachers and making sure that teachers were comfortable in knowing that they were supporting their public education system in addition to helping people get into the private education system if they're in a failing.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that we should look at as citizens that can be of concern. The question is, can you support two school systems effectively, both the vouchers and then also hold harmless the public schools? The other thing is the Tennessee lottery. Can it support the amount of money that's coming out of there to pay for all these scholarships if 20,000 families do indeed take them? And then finally, we've seen the revenue has been slowing down in Tennessee. This budget is lower than it's been in the past. I look at the monthly reports from the comptroller's office, and in fact, we've seen drops of revenue. We gave up, franchise and excise tax last year. So there's a real concern is, can we afford this? Now, obviously, there's I think it's going to be a at least proposed $2.1 billion rainy day fund. There's money there, but the question is, will it be spent on if there's a shortfall of any kind? And I think the last time, I wasn't here personally in Tennessee when it happened, but I remember studying the consequences of the whole TennCare needing to disenroll people during the Bredesen administration, and that was extremely controversial.
So the governor presents his budget. Any thoughts on, you start crunching numbers and I see people, their eyeballs kind of roll back in the back of their heads, but I'm certain that you guys over at the Tennessean are crunching some of these numbers that the governor presented yesterday.
Yeah, I think two of the things that make me excited are the Duck River investments, which I think is $100 million, if I remember correctly. And this whole notion of conservation. This is a river that's constantly being used. He He signed the executive order last fall with protection, and it's important both as an economic engine, but also for environmental purposes. That notion of conservation is so important, and I think he's been consistent when it talks about sustaining and conserving farmland. I think that was very important. The investments in roads, I mean, we are way behind on road projects, bridges, all sorts of infrastructure. And the thing that was really exciting is someone who's covered the housing market for a long, long time, him talking about how do we help Tennesseans who are having trouble afford a house and afford childcare. These are real issues. And there was a podcast with former governors Haslam and Bredesen where they talked about the one thing that tends to unite Democratic and Republican governors is the housing crisis that is affecting every single corner of this country.
Yeah, we spoke on the roads and the bridges piece, and it's one of those issues that it's not sexy, right, if you propose it, because if people are driving over a bridge, they just assume that the bridge is just fine. They don't recognize that we have infrastructure that is in desperate need of repair until such time as oftentimes you have a tragedy occur prior to an investment of funding like the governor was talking about.
And we have to think about the fact that we've seen in Middle Tennessee 30,000 people here growing every single year. And so that's about 80 to 90 people a day who are moving to Middle Tennessee. That's more trucks, more cars, more usage, and, that needs to be maintained.
So David Plazas with us of the Tennessean. So what do we, you took the temperature of the room on DOGE. I took your survey, by the way.
Oh, good.
I did. I think I was too pithy in my comments to get added into the comments. My comments were, the comment that I made to the Tennessean was Article 2, Section 1. Constitution of the United States of America. That was my simple comment. But tell me the inspiration behind.
I saw it, and for those who are not with it with their civics, that's what established the executive of this nation and the Constitution. So again, we've been doing all of these surveys for the last few months just to gauge the sentiment. These are unscientific; they're opinion surveys, so it's not like a poll that you might see from an institution, whether it's the Beacon Center or whether it's Vanderbilt. These basically just take the temperature of the day, and so we had 300 respondents to this survey. As of the last time I checked, and the vast majority don't like the idea of Elon Musk having this great of a role in the federal government. And it's really interesting because we shared comments both pro and con, because I think it's important to see people where they are. And it's not that people don't want to uncover federal waste or fraud or any alleged corruption. It's that they're very concerned about someone who doesn't have accountability to the people, to Article 1 people, the Congress. Right. On the other hand, others who do support it say, look, we feel that this is what Donald Trump was elected for. And there was a recent CBS poll that showed that 53% of Americans support what he does, which is his highest ratings that I can imagine in any recent history.
And obviously I don't begrudge you or the Tennessee and the poll. I mean, the poll is going to be reflective of the individuals taking the poll, and that's all well and good. And as you mentioned, unscientific in nature. I would suggest, if we take telephone calls, those are going to be unscientific in terms of their opinions as well. I did take exception with this though, and I just want your opinion on it. So you say DOGE is not an official arm of government, and the reason, I guess, is in the second sentence. Congress did not create or approve it as it has for other cabinet departments. There are plenty of departments that are official arms of the government that are not approved by Congress.
I got into a discussion with a reader yesterday because there is an Office of Digital Services that in the executive order by President Trump that becomes DOGE, but the purview of digital services is far different from DOGE. DOGE has a very expansive service. Digital services is about looking at purveyors and contractors and purchasers. DOGE is something huge. It is an all-encompassing
but digital services didn't go through Congress either. It was created by Barack Obama in 2014.
Sure, but in this case, this is my opinion, of course. This is
this is what we're doing. That's fine. It's all good. It's fine.
When you have someone of a so-called department, department usually refers to a cabinet department that since the beginning of the Republic, those have been created by Congress. We started with 4 departments back in Washington's time. Defense, the Justice Department, Treasury, and State Department, and now you're up to how many? 16, 17, 18 counter departments. And this is one that has such a massive impact on the state of government. Because you are literally, essentially chopping off the head, figuratively, of the government when you're talking about taking $2 trillion from a $7 trillion budget.
Well, you're talking, and obviously the DOGE now, which was, what he did is roll it in, and that's actually pretty smart, because they recognized that, without rolling it into the executive branch of government, without rolling it into what is known as the executive office of the president, that they would have no authority, Musk and anyone within the DOGE umbrella would have no authority to go into these departments without having some sort of official say by the president. So they roll it into the Digital Services Department, and that gives them the access that they need. But, I mean, do we begrudge the executive branch of acting as a check against Congress and against wasteful or abusive spending? I mean, when I first started in, I guess, 1999, 2000 doing this job, I was a wee lad in my 20s, right? I felt like no matter our differences, we could all agree that if we identify waste, fraud, and abuse, that's something that is good to do because it is, after all, the taxpayer dollars. Isn't that what DOGE is for?
Sure, and this is what the president promised, of course, coming in there. But we also have a system of checks where part of the reason that government is slow and it doesn't run like a business, we need to know what's actually going on. One of the concerns I have, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is this $400 million contract for Tesla to make armored Cybertrucks. Mm-hmm. That, to me, appears to be a conflict of interest when you have the same person who's telling the federal government what to cut also getting a very, very hefty deal. And so that's something that the public needs to be able to examine, that Congress should examine.
Right. And as you saw that Elon Musk said, I'm all about transparency, and anybody that wants to suggest that everything that we've done from a contractual standpoint with the government wasn't done on the up and up and we weren't the highest bidder with the most results, by all means, call us before Congress and we'll speak to that. Otherwise, he says that he does not have any direct control over the letting of those contracts. So, I mean, that would be the response, right? Sure. So I don't believe that you have to choose one or the other necessarily. I think the suggestion that Elon Musk is in this just to keep the contracts is ludicrous. I mean, I think it's absurd.
No, and certainly I'm not saying that, but I think this is certainly
what are you saying?
No, what I'm saying is that there is a conflict of interest of appearance, and he should be held before Congress. So this is an invitation to the congressional delegation, to Senator Blackburn, Senator Hagerty, all of our congressional members to say, use your power, you're the majority. Ask him questions. Actually, this is healthy for democracy. Ask away, and find out what is going on. Because right now, one of the things that Article 2 is a great way to put it. We've seen the expansion of presidential power long before Trump. Before Trump. I mean, this has been something that's there, and the president certainly came in with those promises. And as you know, I've written also critically of former President Biden with his pardons. I mean, that was incredibly disappointing. Yes, he had the power to do what he did. But the question is, at a certain point, there's a reason why we believe in limitations of government and restraint.
Do you think that and I get it, when you are in the minority, you are going to speak loudly and forcefully against certain aspects of what the majority is attempting to do, because typically you're going to be ideologically opposed to some of what's happening. Do you think we're throwing language like constitutional crisis around a little too flippantly?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because I remember I was a wee lad starting as a baby journalist back 25 years ago when Bush versus Gore happened, and everybody was saying this is a constitutional crisis. So it's, for me, as someone who's witnessed this for a quarter of a century, this feels like just politics. This is just political theater. So those words, I think, are thrown around very lazily. And I think we need to figure out exactly what is it. What is it that we are witnessing? Because at this moment, we're witnessing tension and conflict, which is natural. The one thing that does concern me is the idea by Vice President Vance or others that somehow they don't have to listen to court decisions. Because this is part of our structure. I mean, since the Marbury decision, we've had over 200 years of precedent where the court, make a decision. They interpret the Constitution. That's their job. Article 3. And so, we have this responsibility essentially to say, okay, sometimes the president goes too far. We saw that with President Roosevelt and trying to pack the court. He went too far, or many of the New Deal legislation. And in many cases, it's a good thing that we have those ways to stop government from acting too quickly and too fast.
No, I mean, I think the Constitution is the prescription by which you make sure that the executive does not overextend his boundaries. I mean, an executive that wants to accomplish as much as Trump seems to want to accomplish as quickly as possible, I think he's he's keenly aware that he has a very narrow window of time. I mean, it seems like a lot of time, I would say 2 years. I wouldn't even say 4 years, because you get into the midterms, you could lose the House of Representatives. You never know what happens after that. I think he's keenly aware of that. But at the same time, as fast as you go, I don't have a problem. And, I think Vance was identifying what he considered to be activist federal judges, district level judges, that in his opinion were not acting in concert with the Constitution. But the remedy is that you appeal up. And at least I would hope that my Democrat friends and you, David, would agree that Trump was right in saying, of course, we're going to abide, by any stays. We're going to move through the system and allow the third branch of government to do its job as we're trying to do ours.
No, of course. And we're seeing that play out. And obviously the president can appeal, and I tell people, and I've talked to Cameron Smith, our mutual friend, about this, that the president tends to say a lot of outlandish things. And that's just a reality of his personality. And sometimes he's saying it literally and sometimes not, but it is disconcerting to his enemies. But this has always been the way that he's operated. I mean, he is someone who's a pugilist.
It's been interesting to observe that some of the more outlandish comments that he seems to make have purpose behind them in a way that maybe they did not in his first term. Gulf of America, buying Greenland, these types of things, or restructuring deal with the Panama Canal. I think he says things to set a topic in a way that he tries to then negotiate from where the topic is set by him. Does that make sense?
Well, absolutely. And this is one of the difficulties for the press. I was asked by a gentleman at an event I was at on Monday, it's like, how do you think the press is doing? And I said, right now it's hard because there's so much coming at us, to your earlier point, that it's very difficult to explain to people what is going on. And with very limited attention spans, people get their media all over the place. And sometimes they might read one story or two stories a day, or they may get it from a place that might be forwarding information that might not be totally verified. And so this is the big challenge. And we already have the trust challenge. We've seen polls from Gallup that show declining trust. And so a lot of what I do, a lot of the work I do, and going out, and it's an honor to be here, by the way, in your studio.
Oh, no,
because
very good.
I think it's important to be present in places, especially where you're going to be uncomfortable, because that's how you get some great conversations going.
Well, I give David credit, and for those who don't like David's, what perceived, I wouldn't even say reality, but the perceived ideology, and I'm going to ask you that question in just a moment, but you cannot deny that you go everywhere asked, right? I mean, you're going all over the state of Tennessee, and you walk into these arenas that that there are more probably, right of center conservatives, libertarians who perhaps disagree with you on a lot of policy perspectives, but that's how you learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. David Plazas with us. He is the editorial editor of the Tennessean, discussing a variety of topics, including, I'm curious, genuinely curious about your response to perceptions. You travel the state, you talk to people. How do you respond to the perception? Do you believe it's a perception or a reality that the Tennessean is further left than its readership?
I understand that perception because for the longest time, the Tennessean endorsed Democratic candidates for president, from 1908 all the way to 2008. And that shifted in 2012 with Mitt Romney. We don't endorse for president anymore. So there was that building perception. Now, Democrats were a different type of political animal, shall we say, decades ago than they are today.
Yeah.
But I understand whether there's that perception. And typically, because the Tennessean from the 60s on was very much focused on civil rights and pro-civil rights, we had that expose in the late 70s against the Ku Klux Klan. There was this belief that it was a leftist newspaper. One of the things that we've tried to do over the last few years with the work on civility and civil discourse, the stuff that gets me to travel across Nashville and across the state, is having different voices, being true to our First Amendment responsibilities, freedom of the press, essentially our responsibilities to offer and amplify underrepresented viewpoints, be they conservative viewpoints or views from a marginalized community, or also welcoming diverse viewpoints. We've been thrilled over the last few years to be able to have relationships with lawmakers who want to share their positions, and typically GOP lawmakers. Obviously,
you mentioned Gino Bolso has a piece today, right?
Yes. So he wrote this week published a piece related to his pro-life legislation that would allow civil penalties for mailed abortion pills, and so he explains why he has that position and why he wants to further this, and why he believes that because Donald Trump won in Tennessee, a pro-life majority is wanting more pro-life type of legislation.
Do you make an effort to seek those individuals out? I mean, obviously Cameron Smith, who appears with us weekly on Super Talk 99.7 and the Matt Murphy Show. I mean, Cameron gets picked on. Everybody calls him Cameron Romney because they say he's not right enough. But I mean, he's obviously right of center as it comes to a columnist at the Tennessean. You have him on staff, but do you actively, as editorial editor, do you feel like it's part of your role? And I don't know the answer to this, but to like seek out divergent voices to bring them in for commentary.
Absolutely. You know, I'm developing relationships with people across the community. You know, whether I was involved with interviewing the Equity Alliance a few years ago. Senator Charlene Oliver is now in the legislature, or talking to members of the legislature, be it Speaker Sexton, who I'll probably be seeing again soon at the Tennessee Press Association event next week. You know, these are important to have these relationships. We're not always going to agree on these things, but having those platforms, and they can also get you criticized. You know, if people say, well, you would publish anybody, any voice, or any horrible voice. And what was funny in December, our top two viewed articles, one was by Josh Abatoy with The Founding, who talked about how he believes that rural red communities are the future of Tennessee and not Nashville. Mm-hmm. And then the other one was from April Lieberman. She's an attorney who talks about why Trump is back in the White House. It was a list of grievances, blaming everyone from Biden to MAGA voters, and really strong language. But one of the things that at first I was a little bit nervous about that, because like such very opposite views. But then I said, people feel comfortable that this is a platform where we can discuss these ideas. And yeah, and sometimes you're going to get a lot of vitriol from it.
You wrote a piece, and as we were talking about this right a few moments ago, you mentioned that you recognize that some of these latest columns are fairly controversial in their nature. The headline, Trump and other opportunistic politicians are punching down on trans people. Why do you feel that way?
Trans people make up less than 1% of the American population. From what we know, UCLA keeps numbers on this. 1.6 million trans people are in America, and you have a population of 340 million people. And I think a lot of the legislation that we've seen the last decade in Tennessee and other places is about targeting how people use the bathroom, where their movements are, how they interact with children, all these things that are creating these beliefs that somehow they're dangerous. A few years ago, there was legislation that was passed to ban gender-affirming care. This is before the Supreme Court now in this session, and the Trump administration recently pulled its opposition to the Tennessee lawsuit. It emanates. It's the Attorney General Skermetti's lawsuit. And I think, you know, I don't think it was based on science. At least that was my perception in talking to the leaders. You know, they had their of the legislature, they had their perceptions, and there was a report from the Daily Wire, if I may mention them, sure, that I didn't think met muster, because it was an accusation that Vanderbilt University was mutilating and savaging children when there was no evidence of that. And
there were some receipts to it, though. I mean,
but not about the mutilation or savaging of this stuff. And there was certainly there were, I believe it was 5 surgeries over a period of 5 years per year, but they were for people who were under 16.
But if you take exception with the word mutilation, I would argue that the word gender affirming is also a tremendously politically loaded term.
Sure. I mean, as in any word or any phrase when you get into politics.
But there's no question that Vanderbilt was providing surgeries on minors.
Sure, but not in the context of having a 9-year-old, for example, who was so-called mutilated.
Right.
That was, we have no evidence that happened. I mean, I think.
Have you looked?
Yeah.
Has the Tennessean looked?
Yes, we have. We actually.
And what do you run into HIPAA law?
That and also Vanderbilt did report, a couple of its cases, and I know that the Attorney General right now is investigating whether or not there was any kind of fraud in terms of medical billing. And I interviewed the Attorney General on that very issue, and so I understand that there's a concern that something may have run afoul. But what if it wasn't? What if this is just all politics? So, for example, President Trump.
Well, if it's all politics, Vanderbilt certainly they closed up shop and folded their tent pretty quickly, didn't they?
Yeah, I think that they retreated. I'm not sure what the extent of the care is anymore there. But one of the things that I think I was concerned about with President Trump's executive order on establishing 2 genders is that we know, for example, from any kind of science textbook, that's not exactly so. I mean, we know people are born intersex. We know that typically societally we have male and female, but it's a lot more complicated than that. We even had one Jewish rabbi talk about Judaism, from his interpretation, recognizes 8 types of genders. We have, and so this is one thing I know it can boggle the mind at
but
times.
I mean, how many are there though, David?
I'm not a scientist, so I don't know.
Well, see, this is the answer I get every time somebody wants to get off the number 2, but they don't want to tell me what the number is because we don't know. I mean, I think common sense kind of prevails for me on this subject that we recognize that there are 2 genders, and we also recognize that obviously with a body system as complex as ours, that you're going to have gender anomalies. And, sure. and by definition, those that are transgendered are telling me that a mistake was made at the time that they were born. That is their definition, not mine. Mm-hmm. I'm not calling them a mistake. They're saying that they should not have been born with a certain set of genitalia. Sure. They should have been born with different genitalia. I do not believe that
that's what gender dysphoria is.
Well, and I understand that, but I do not believe that any society can possibly be expected to set itself up where the vast norms are male-female, and you expect to protect some females in certain circumstances. How do you then set yourself up for a number of genders that no one can define for me?
No, I understand that, but I think back to the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, talking to the Senate in December, and he was asked how many trans athletes are there, trans women athletes. He said 10 out of 530,000 or so. So we're basically making policy laws.
Isn't one male athlete taking away the accomplishments of female athletes in female sports one too many?
Well, again, this is related to someone who is transgender or transgender woman. And I realize we have different opinions about this. Sure. People will use terms, whether it's biological male or biological female. My understanding, at least in conversations with people who are trans, trying to understand science, and again, I'm not an expert in this field, but I think part of it is just a basic sense of empathy to say that sometimes people are different than they are. And yes, it's important to have these conversations and have legitimate conversations on, what is the real reason we are restricting people from doing one activity or another? Why is it necessary, for example, to have a new bathroom bill every single year, when you don't have evidence that you have folks who are creeping on other people? I mean, what is the real reason behind that?
I mean, we've seen examples, certainly nationwide. I don't know that I could cite one specifically in the state of Tennessee. I guess an argument could be made whether 4 or 8 or 16 examples are going to constitute a widespread platform. But I just don't know that it is in the spirit of civility that if we have a legitimate disagreement on an issue as complex as this, that we would label my position bullying because it is not the position of someone else's.
Well, I think when you're in a position of power, like the president is, it is bullying because you basically are going after someone who doesn't have power.
Well, I mean, but would you say that to the young girls that lose out to biological males in their sport of choice because they are made to compete against those biological males?
Give me an example of
Riley Gaines is a great example.
I'm familiar with Riley Gaines, yeah, for sure. I mean,
who lost out to a biological male.
But it was one race, though,
but so one race, it's okay? Is 2 races okay? Is 10 races okay?
I mean, this is the question. The NCAA probably didn't know. It should have probably gotten into this conversation a long time ago. But at the end of the day, my concern, especially in this column, is about just the very dignity of a person. And maybe we need to discuss what are, if someone has a particular level of testosterone, should this person be there? We have some standards already in the Olympic contests, for example, whether it's racing or otherwise. Why can't that be applied as well? Unfortunately, it's seen, from my perception, it's seen as just punching down.
Well, no, I mean, fairly stated. David Plazas with us for a few more moments. What's next on the horizon? I mean, the conversations are fast. They're furious. The Donald Trump administration is moving at a breakneck speed. Just what are your thoughts on the speed of all of this happening, and what do you consider to be next on the horizon?
Yeah, my concern about the speed is that there are going to be constant lawsuit fights and other resistance to this stuff, and we're already seeing that there have been several injunctions, whether it's birthright citizenship or other measures as well, or even talking about the controversy related to the early retirement. Buyouts, sure. I should say. So right now there's a lot of confusion. What exactly is going on? And that's my concern. Like there's not enough time for people to understand what's happening and to get a good explanation of that, because sometimes the president will say what's on his mind at that very moment, and it may be different the next day. That is just, it could be tactical. It could be something that's just, he's become distracted about something. But at the very end, I think, people who feel addled, what I like to tell them is like, take a deep breath, look back, try to understand what actually has happened. And then if there's something you disagree with, use the power of your voice, the power of your money to donate to the places that you want to donate to, whether it's a conservative cause or a liberal cause, and just act. And don't be mopey.
You feel like people on the political left are kind of freaking out right now?
Well, sure.
I mean, I think that's sure. a natural reaction.
They're freaking out to a degree, but I also think that in some cases Trump is, he is uniting his opposition, at this moment, whether or not they're able to do anything because the Republicans have a majority in Congress.
I thought Scott Jennings, who is a conservative commentator on CNN, made an excellent point. I'm curious your thoughts on it. He said that, Trump has figured out that, whatever position he takes on an issue, the opposition is going to, in some ways, in a knee-jerk fashion, take an opposite position. And so he's now taking 80-20 positions. And what I mean by that is 80% of America agree with him on these. I mean, a good example, I mean, border security and rounding up known criminals around the United States of America typically polls well in excess of 50% in terms of support of doing that. And I mean, I understand that it's a little more complex. You want to distinguish between those who have committed no other crimes other than, coming into the country, against the country's immigration laws. But at the same time, the people support, rounding up Trende or Aragua, I never can say it, or some of these other gangs. I think there's a danger in a knee-jerk fashion opposing everything that Trump does.
Well, I absolutely agree. One should examine the policy. I think Cameron Smith wrote a great column related to the fact that, why are you mad about Trump enforcing immigration law that Congress could have acted, decades ago on fixing this particular issue. And right now, the perception right now is that ICE is going after, ordinary people, food truck workers, for example, in Memphis at the Taco and Ganas food truck. And so I think there's a lot of fear. Cameron wrote about how he was at Plaza Mariachi and he saw all of these cards, both in English and Spanish, talking about what people can do to protect their own civil rights. And so there is this palpable fear, I think, out there in terms of what happens next. What's the next shoe to drop? I think one of the concerns I have, and again, this could be, tactical, but the perception, I think, is very strong that Trump is trying. He said that he would act like a dictator just on day one. Remember that?
Sure.
And the birthright citizenship executive order, I think, is one of the worst he's done because he can't amend the Constitution. He does not have that authority.
Well, of course he doesn't, but he recognized and said as much in the White House. And obviously Donald Trump was joking when he said, I'll just be a dictator just on day one. He said, just on day one, and then it's fine, because he was asked a question about the perception amongst the political left that he was going to be an authoritarian.
But it's one thing to say that he doesn't agree with birthright citizenship. It's another thing to put the force of the presidency of Article 2 force.
Well, right. And the judicial branch, being an equal branch of government, has the ability to oversee whether or not the executive order is a constitutional matter, and that's why it's in the courts. Remember, that's not a constitutional crisis. That's a constitutional remedy.
Well, I don't know, because the Constitution lays out how the Constitution is to be amended, and the executive has nothing to do with that.
Well, no, what they are doing is the executive branch is stating that their interpretation of birthright citizenship and the subordinate clause in the first sentence of the 14th Amendment would suggest that you have to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And they are interpreting subject to the jurisdiction thereof indicates that you are in fact born of United States citizens.
But remember, interpretation is the job of the judiciary. Well, the other thing that I think that he gets in trouble with is that during the Biden administration...
But you have to take an action, David, in order to get it into the courts to begin with. You have to have a causal factor in order to get it there, and that's what Donald Trump has done. So I would think that you would be happy that we're going to get an answer to this question. And frankly, I think the answer is going to be birthright citizenship is constitutional.
But we got that answer in the late 19th century. So we know what the answer is.
No. We did not get that answer in the late 19th century. Now, the question of the interpretation that Donald Trump's using, and it's never been brought before the courts. Not since the 14th was passed. And the 14th was obviously specifically passed based on the obvious disastrous results of the evils of slavery. And the suggestion is that it was directly related to slavery, not related to an influx of immigration. This is the debate. And that's all good.
I appreciate being able to debate this with you.
David, thank you for spending some time with us. It's been a great hour, and we'll do it again soon.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah.